I was in my senior year of high school. I wasn't the most tech-savvy kid there, but my friends loved to talk about the dark web and the Silk Road in particular. They said you could buy crazy things like organs in children. I had no idea how to even access the dark web, and when I would type in Silk Road, only fake websites would pop up displaying how the original website really looked like. Unlike the real website, however, the fake one did not function like a website at all. During the spring semester, my friends and I did lots of research on how to actually access the deep web. We found out you had to download something called Tor Browser and get software that continuously changes your VPN just to be safe from hackers and to hide your personal information. Once we found this out, we decided it wouldn't hurt to try. One Friday after practice, we went over to our friend Chris's house to use his computer and start downloading all the necessary materials. Once Sunday came around, it was ready to go, but it was late, and we all had to be home for Sunday dinner, so we postponed the dark web browsing until Monday after practice. My friends Jake, Chris, Robbie, and I were ready for whatever the deep web would bring us, or so we thought. On Monday, we were all super excited throughout the day. The evening came before we knew it, and it was time. We headed over Chris's house after practice with great enthusiasm and excitement. We opened the Tor browser and started searching right away. There were so many different links that had vague labels to the left of them. Every type of drug imaginable was on the dark web, even many I have never even heard of. The prices seemed quite cheap compared to what they would sell for on the streets. We were intrigued and wanted to purchase some harmless weed just for fun. We sent it to a community mailbox with no direct address to any of our houses. We figured it would be better to be safe than sorry. To purchase anything on the dark web, you couldn't use a credit card like normal sites such as eBay and Amazon. You have to use Bitcoin, which is an electronic currency that you can purchase with a credit card. We all pitched in enough money to purchase 2 grams of the devil's lettuce. We decided to end the dark web browsing after we purchased our item, and decided to wait and see if it came. Sure enough, the following Monday, we had a small envelope-style package in the community mailbox. After the package got in our possession, we sorted through the unnecessary bubble wrap that was within, and found our 2 grams of weed. After practicing that Monday, we decided to smoke it, and it was really high quality. Once we were finished, we were all the highest we have ever been, so we decided to go back to Chris's house to do some more exploring of the deep web. Unfortunately, between our successful purchase and enjoying it a little too much, we became cocky. We started clicking on links we had no business looking through. After endless clicking and exploring through different drugs, organs, and even human items up for purchase, we stumbled on a site that seemed to be holding a live video with the chat box. Everyone in the chat room seemed super excited for what was about to happen, so we decided to stay and see what it was all about. There was a countdown clock for when the show was going to begin, and we sat and waited in excitement. The countdown read 20 more seconds. The 4 of us sat waiting with no clue on what was going to happen, but the people watching and chatting were getting anxious. They were typing stuff like, "Let's get this show on the road," and "Come on, start it already." The clock had hit 0 seconds, and the curtain animation popped up like a movie. We were greeted by what looked to be a circus ringleader who wore an extravagant costume equipped with a cape and cane. He seemed to be in an all blacked out room, with what seemed to have no exit points such as windows or doors. The only lighting was a dim red light that faintly illuminated the room. The 4 of us were eerily confused. The host of the show is great with his words and an excellent salesman as he encourages the viewers to keep donating Bitcoin with suggestions. At the time, we didn't think anything of the suggestions and demands these people were saying in the chat. We just kept watching. After about a 60-second intro, the host states, "Let us begin." A door began to swing open in the room, and a very large man walked in with a young red-headed girl being pushed in front of him. The large man wearing an all-black suit then brings in a chair that seems to have leather wrist and ankle straps on it. This is when our buddy Jake said that he was getting a bad feeling about this whole thing, and that we should just shut it off. However, if you remember high school, you remember it being some of the most curious and adventurous years of your life, up to that age at least. Thus, we convinced him to continue watching. The large man forces the girl into the chair and straps her in. The host is reading the chat and donations and begins with the highest bidder. A user with the screen name of Applecorn36 with his suggestion first because he donated lots of Bitcoin which in US dollars was equal to about $1,500. His suggestion was extreme. His donation read, "Break every one of her fingers and toes." Before the four of us could react, the large man had a large wrench in his hand, starting to swing with great force on this poor girl's digits. While this is happening on camera, Chris does something stupid. He begins to type things like, "You are all sick in the head. How could you enjoy doing this to another human being?" And the worst one yet, "We're going to call the cops." It didn't take long after Chris's comments in the chat box for us to regret the very thought of using the dark web. Chris tried to close the link and page we were on, but it wouldn't let him. He tried to force close the Tor browser, but that also didn't work. Immediately after trying that, a new chat box popped up on Chris's screen. The name read, "Admin." He sent a message within a few seconds of the box popping up. It read, "You made a huge mistake coming on our site, Chris." The fact that this random stranger knew our buddy's name freaked all four of us out. Unfortunately, this guy wasn't done. He went on to say he knew where Chris lived and that he had 2 sisters and a dog. We had no idea how this guy found out all of Chris's info, but this admin guy also knew his address. He said if he contacted anyone, including our families, about what he saw on the dark web, he would be sorry. The next thing we knew, his face cam light indicator went on, and a half a second after that, he sent a photo in the chat box with all 4 of our faces in it to some extent. Mine and Jake's faces were cut off, but Robbie and Chris's face were clear as day. The next message he sent said this: "We know who all of you are now, and also what you look like. Do not talk to anyone, or very bad things will happen to you." The following few days, we all walked around the school like ghosts. We rarely interacted with other students. We were living in fear at the time. At our water polo practices, it was clear to our coach that there was something off with the 4 of us, who were captains of the team. Thursday at practice, our coach pulled us aside and said, "Okay, I want to know, what's up?" We hesitated to tell him, but he lived in another city, so we thought it was safe enough to tell him. We told him everything, minus the weed part, because we didn't want to get suspended from the team for drug use. He said, "Wow, you fellas really got yourselves in a predicament." He told us to stay away from that part of the internet, and to make sure our family stays safe by locking every door and window in our house, and possibly sleeping with a hockey stick, or even a baseball bat under our beds, just in case the owners of the site wanted to shut us up for good. That night, we all went home and did exactly that. Friday of that week, things went somewhat back to normal at school. We were back to participating in our classes and goofing around like normal. Practice was the same, and our coach smirked with satisfaction, almost as if taking credit for fixing us. Friday night, the 4 of us were hanging out at Chris's house. His mom and dad had cooked an awesome pasta feast after our practice. We were in his basement playing video games the rest of the night. At around 11 p.m., there was a loud screeching noise that came from the outside of his house, and the 4 of us went to see what it was. Chris's parents were asleep upstairs, so the 4 of us tried to be quiet as we peered out the window. What we saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. We all looked out the same window and let out gasps. There was a gray passenger van parked outside Chris's mailbox. 3 large figures got out and slowly, almost like a slow-motion shot in a movie, walked towards the house. Without even saying words, we all sprinted to Chris's garage to find anything we can use to defend ourselves if they ended up getting in the locked-up house. I grabbed a baseball bat and called 911. I explained to them, "We have 3 intruders trying to get into my friend's house. Please send someone." Normally, you're supposed to stay on the phone with the 911 dispatcher, but I knew I would need both hands. These guys were on a mission. Robbie grabbed a hockey stick, Chris a kitchen knife, and Jake decided an old rusty driver. Our plan was to wait in Chris's kitchen for the men to enter, and hopefully fight them off. As expected, the men came from the back door. They shattered the glass of the sliding door, and saw all 4 of us in the same room with weapons. They grinned as if they had hit the jackpot with all 4 of us in the same house. The breaking glass woke the dog, and he came down to investigate. Unfortunately, a white, fluffy small dog was no match for the situation, and he just left. The men came at us with an array of different knives. One man, the biggest, about 6 foot 8 inches, and at least 275 pounds, had a large cleaver used to chop cow bones in a butcher shop. The next tall, dark figure had what looked like a long dagger, and the third had a large chef's knife even Gordon Ramsay would have been proud of. With no hesitation, the men all sprinted at us. Chris and I immediately tried to chop at the biggest man's legs. We thought that was the best strategy. Tag team the big guy. Robbie was in a knife fight with the guy who had the dagger. Jake was swinging his golf club like a madman against the guy with the chef knife. In the distance, we could hear sirens coming, and Chris's parents had woken up and come downstairs to see what was happening. They were terrified at the sight, and his mother went out front to flag down the police, and Chris's dad tried to help us fight these guys off. The largest guy said, "Boys, we gotta go!" All of them ran out the back door with limps. I guess we did a number on them. We were not unscathed, however. Chris and I each had pretty deep gashes from the cleaver. Jake had taken the large knife to the leg a couple of times, and Robbie did well in his knife fight. But he was cut pretty bad in the stomach. After our encounter with the intruders, we all thought it was necessary to tell the truth about everything that happened. The next few weeks, there were officers at all of our houses just in case there was another issue. I don't even think about what would have happened if the three of us weren't at Chris's house that night, but thankfully, we were. Since then, we have all moved on to college in various states, but when we come back home for breaks, we are still traumatized by the events of that night 3.5 years ago. My story begins a few years ago. I decided to use my computer skills to run a small darknet forum, mainly just to share information without censorship. At first, I was extremely paranoid about getting my site hacked, and having my anonymity being compromised, so I went online and began to research everything that I would need to ensure my own safety. After countless days of scouring blogs, forums, and other material, I decided I was ready now. I didn't have any money, so I couldn't just buy a VPS and host the site offshore or whatever. So, I decided to use my old laptop. After all, I wasn't planning on running a major website. So, after setting the server up and what I thought was literally every single thing I could do to harden it against attack, I put the site online. Everything went great for a couple of months. Donations rolled in as the user base grew larger and larger. After around 5 months, the user base had gotten so big I had to upgrade and migrate everything to a new PC, which I built just to host the forum, and from there, everything seemed perfect. The site was running smoothly, and there were no issues with the migration, until one day when I came home and noticed the PC had frozen. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe just a software bug caused it, so I rebooted it. And that's when it was clear to me something was wrong with the PC. It lit up and beeped a few times, then shut off. So, I thought to myself, okay, so it's gotta be a hardware issue. After a few hours of trying to diagnose the issue, I figured out, and it turned out to be the RAM had been corrupted. So, I took it back to the store since it was still under warranty. The customer rep just told me it might have been a faulty stick. When I got home, I replaced the stick of RAM and had the site back up and running within a few hours. Everything seemed to be perfect again. I apologized to the users for the downtime, and everyone seemed to be happy enough. Fast forward a few more months. The forum's been up and running for around 1.5 years now. This is when things started to get really weird. I finished work on a Friday. It was a gorgeous day in the middle of summer. I came home, had something to eat, and sat down in front of my PC, and noticed I had a message. Upon opening the message, I realized that somewhere I'd messed up. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not like an assassin or anything, so I don't really know why anybody would actually target me, but the world is a crazy place, so whatever. The message had my details from my name, address, bank details, passwords, private emails, private messages, everything from nearly every single device I've ever owned. I began freaking out and immediately took the PC offline. Turned my internet off, but little did I know that this guy had done his research. After a couple hours of pacing my room, I received a text message. "I know everything about you." The message was sent via some type of SMS service, so there was no way to trace it, and then my phone began to ring. "Don't talk, just listen. I know everything there is to know about you. All I want is 2 Bitcoin, or things can get worse. I'll send you a text with the wallet details." The phone call ended just as quickly as it started. I opened my laptop up and checked my Bitcoin wallet. There was enough left over from the donations just to pay this guy off, and hoped that would be the end of it. So, I entered the guy's details and sent the payment. My phone began to ring again. "Thank you for complying. Unfortunately, someone I know really likes you." He hung up. Panicking, I tried to call the number back, but an automated message began to play. "The number you have dialed has not been recognized." A few hours passed, and I began to think to myself, well, maybe the last call was just him having fun, and decided after a long day, I'd just go to bed. Sometime around 2 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of banging at my front door. I jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights, grabbing a knife from the kitchen. I walked slowly towards the window and looked out so I could see someone standing by a car. When they spotted me, they got in and drove off. I rushed to the door in hopes I might be able to get a license plate, but by the time I'd opened it, they'd already turned the corner. As I turned, I noticed an envelope on the floor. I picked it up, went back inside, and locked the door, closed the curtains and sat in the kitchen. I placed the envelope up on the counter and stared at it for around half an hour, trying to muster up the courage to open it. Did these guys really come to my home? I thought to myself. After the half hour was up, I decided enough was enough. I opened the envelope and pictures fell out onto the counter. They were of me, sleeping. These guys had not only been outside my house, they'd been inside whilst I was sleeping. The images had been edited, and strange love hearts had been added next to me, so now I was sufficiently freaked out. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and when the sun broke the darkness, I decided to head to the police station and tell them everything. I hadn't broke any laws, so I hoped they would just help me, at least after hours of explaining everything to them. They told me there was nothing they could do, unfortunately. At this point, I had never felt so alone in the world. I was so scared of what this guy was planning for me. I didn't have the foggiest idea what I was supposed to do or expect. So, I decided to wipe everything from my laptop, PC, and phone. I picked up everything I needed, stuffed it all into a bag, and decided to leave. I had a couple of friends that I knew I could rely on, so I called up my old buddy Marcus, and we had a few beers. I explained everything to him. He offered me a place to stay, and I hoped that would be the end of it. How wrong I was. A few days later, it happened again. There was a knock at the door, first thing in the morning. Me and Marcus both went out to find another envelope on the floor. Same thing. Pictures of me sleeping, but these were in Marcus's house. I began to freak out even more, and Marcus just said, "Okay, well, we need to do something. Maybe set a trap, or I don't know." So, we went over numerous ideas, everything you could think of, from cameras to baiting him, and we were settled on the idea of staying up during the night and locking him in the room. We filled the bed up with pillows, set up cameras, and even barred the windows in the room. We hid in the room next door. After a few hours had passed, we heard the lock rattling on the front door, and we knew it was game time. We left the door just slightly ajar so we could see outside as he went past, and the moment he went into the room, we both sprung into action as quickly as we could. We closed the door and locked it from the outside using a chair and a metal bar. There was only one way he was getting out, and he'd have to destroy the door. We could see the silhouette of him as he paced the room quietly. It was creepy as hell. We called the police as we kept an eye on him. At least, I thought I could finish this and move on with my life. Just as the police arrived, we noticed the guy took out a gun and placed it to his head. He held up a sign which read, "I love you," and he pulled the trigger. The police barged in, guns drawn, told us both to get on the floor. We complied and shouted, "He's in there!" pointing at the door. The police removed the makeshift lock and entered the room, called for an ambulance, and put me and Marcus in the back of a patrol car. I'd been sat in the interview room for a good couple of hours, I guess whilst they carried out the investigation, when a detective came in and sat down in front of me, opening a folder and placing pictures on the table. "Do you know her?" "Her?" I said, looking at the pictures. "No," I replied, confused. He looked at me and said, "This is the person who's been stalking you." And he then began to tell me they had visited her home, and she found a shrine with photos of me all over the place, from restaurants to the gym, even shopping. He went on to tell me that she'd been the one that sent the messages, made the phone calls, and everything else. They'd also found a diary which had some kind of future plans for me and her. She wanted me to be her husband, and we'd been chatting for around a year and a half from the moment I started the forum. After I explained everything, the detective said I was lucky to be alive. She actually planned to drug me and kidnap me. She had even made some makeshift lock bed, so I wouldn't even be able to escape. To this day, I feel lucky, and I haven't been on the dark web since.